Actually, I started working as a treatment activist in 1991, before most of you were even born. So I'm sort of the dinosaur in the room. So, you know, just if I sort of forget something, please, someone can shout out that I forgot something. But I've been with community advisory boards actually since 1995. And we came up with the idea as a way of making it easier to collaborate with multiple stakeholders at the same time, but from a patient point of view. So I suppose I need something to, yes, right. Yes. So, I mean, so obviously the new idea that's finally hit the industry, the whole world in general, is that patients can be involved from the very beginning of the process of discovering drugs, of when a molecule or the idea of a therapy comes to a scientist's head, they should call the patients and say, does this make sense? Is this what we should be doing? Before they even go into pre-animal testing, they should be talking to patients. What are your needs? And then all through the research pipeline, at every point of the process, patients need to be involved in all of these places, and even out the other side. Not only at approval, but post-approval and post-marketing, and continuing through the whole life of the therapy, of the innovation. And this is from Jan Geisler and Bettina, a paper that they wrote in 2016. Jan was the chief of UPATI. So a community advisory board really simply is a group of patients who sit around a table with the sponsors of research, whether it's a clinical trials network or a commercial sponsor, whatever the case may be. But it's where we discuss ideas and try to move forward. The specific agenda could be the overall, must be this one. The overall program development of the whole paradigm of what we want to do as a company over the next 10 years in this disease field, or it could be on one single clinical trial. We talk about inclusion-exclusion criteria, the informed consent, how many patients do we need, all the specifics of one specific clinical trial. Or we can talk about other things beyond the program itself, the research itself, things like access, things like pricing, things that are very important to us as patients. And at the same time, we don't just advise one sponsor or one clinical developer, but as many as there are in the field. And obviously in the case of lymphoma, that means a lot of companies that would be sitting down and talking to us. And what this does by having many companies involved is that we as patients won't be seen as being in the pockets of any one company, that we'll be sharing the responsibilities between all of us. And of course, a really important thing is that the agenda and the secretariat, the management of this community advisory board comes from the patient side. It's not that we're invited to a company meeting and they have a list of questions and they want us to answer, but where we prepare along with them what we want to talk about at this meeting and to move forward. So this is what it was in 1995 when I started collaborating with companies, is that sponsor A would say, oh yeah, time to have a meeting with patients to see if we can get them on board, if they agree with our idea. So they would have a meeting with patients, and the next day or the next week or the previous day, the previous week, they would also meet with other experts in the field separately. And then sponsor B would come along and do the same thing. They'd have their patient meeting and their investigators meetings, and it would go on and on and on. And all of a sudden I realized, even worse than today, in 1995, I was literally running from airport to airport to do all these different meetings with all these different companies. So we had an idea of maybe we could consider ourselves the host and have the sponsors and other experts come to us, where we could, over, let's say, a long weekend, have diverse and deep conversations with multiple sponsors in the same meeting area, not in the same room, but on Thursday sponsor A, Friday sponsor B, Saturday sponsor C, etc. And that worked really well. I don't think I have a slide, but what this did is this allowed us to go from having 3 really toxic and not very effective drugs in the early 90s to today, and also there were so many pills you needed both hands to hold them all, that today HIV is 1 pill once a day, and now there are even treatments where they're injectables once every 2 months, for example. And I don't mean to say that this was all because the companies listened to the patients, but I think we were a serious stakeholder. We were taken seriously, and that was reflected in the research programs and the ultimate results of their trials, which was getting better and better, not only more and more, but better and better drugs approved, so that this toxic group of 50 pills that people were taking in the early 90s turns out to be something that I hardly even notice that I'm taking. It's sort of like something, I wake up and I take a pill, and that's sort of, and then I can forget about HIV for the rest of the day. And I think that's, and people were dying in the 90s, and now they're not, if they have access, which is another issue. So, Community Advisory Board. Again, it's really very simple. I think the most important part is to work on protocols, go into detail about what does this protocol mean? Are the patient-relevant outcomes really patient-relevant outcomes? Are they the patient-relevant outcomes that are meaningful to my kids, for example? In Duchenne, we had a Duchenne cab in early June, and we had 12 parents around the table, and we had 4 companies in 4 different meetings, and everyone said, the 6-minute walk test is ridiculous. I don't know if you know 6-minute walk test, but it's how to measure how far, basically a little kid who can't walk, how far he can walk in 6 minutes. And it's really, besides being humiliating to the patient, it's not an important measure for them, because for them, they want to be able to have upper body control and be able to move their arms and so forth, because they're losing their legs already. And so what they need to show whether or not the therapy is doing anything, they want to see that, yes, I'm still in control. I still have some control over my life. And so how do we measure that, and not this 6-minute walk test that was meaningful or useful 20 years ago, but is really not helpful today. So those are types of things that we can be very specific on. We can also talk about strategy trials. Strategy trials. If I'm talking too fast, just say. I know I'm sometimes, okay, thank you. Strategy trials are where perhaps we can consider working on with various companies or various products in the same trial. For example, what today are called platform trials, where we're able to look at multiple therapies from multiple companies in the same trial over different entry and exit periods for the therapies. And that's something that companies are a little reticent to do, but it's something that if it works for us, we'd like to talk to companies about. And again, this is all stuff that, these are negotiations between the patients and the companies. It's not things that we're insisting on, although sometimes we are, but it's negotiating, trying to get to a common ground and work together. Of course, we're always interested in compassionate use. Who gets access to these drugs who are not in the trials, and when will that happen? That's really important, because trials are obviously always limited and fairly small. And so are there other people who are able to access this therapy if certain safety requirements have been carried out? And of course, when we're not only looking at one protocol, but we're interested, what else do you have in the pipeline, Mr. Drug Company? Do you have 4 other drugs earlier in the pipeline that we want to look at or start considering and talking to you about? And again, pricing and access is something that is coming up more and more and more, especially in rare diseases, because the prices are difficult to maintain. No, not difficult to justify, difficult to maintain. And so the value of a cab, we think from Eurordis's point of view, I was going to say from Eurordis's point of view, but I see that the slides have been changed. These are, what we offer, hopefully, is that we can help companies shorten the development time because the trial is more patient-friendly and more rigorous from a patient point of view. And also that the patient-reported outcomes and the patient-reported outcome measures are more relevant for the patient. And that hopefully will turn into faster recruitment and better retention. And if we get faster recruitment and better retention, hopefully we'll get faster approval and market access. But also in the meantime, there are other important things that we can discuss with companies that sometimes are, I think companies are interested in doing this, is that working with registries, making registries better, making registries more talkable amongst themselves between countries and so forth, so we get a better idea of the natural history, et cetera, of diseases, which also may help in lessening the amount of time or the need for placebo, for example, if we get better registries and better natural history. I think in these meetings, companies often can get a better idea of the real-life experience of people living with the disease and their carers, and I think generally it forms a tighter collaboration for the company with patients. So the idea is that we would become patient investigators. At the EMA, there's a thing called clinical investigators, that doctors or clinicians are invited to EMA and they're called clinical investigators. We think that we deserve the same respect because we actually give as deeply as any clinicians do from the EMA or from any regulatory authority, that we're considered not just people who meet with companies, but we're actually patient investigators. We're actually redesigning or better designing trials that the investigators, the companies, the researchers are considering. And here I just mentioned that it could be the same disease or similar, because in many diseases the populations are so small that sometimes we look for similar diseases to enable us to have enough people. I think I have a slide, but the idea would be to have 10 or 12 people be able to come together and talk to companies about issues, both issues on a national or local level, but also that are important for the population as a whole. Meeting at regular intervals. Right now I'm working with, like I said, Duchenne and also cystic fibrosis and tuberous sclerosis. And we meet at regular intervals, which is about 2 times a year. It depends on the number of companies and of the need of the actual disease. And I'm seeing with Duchenne that we may actually need 3 a year, not 2, because of the number of companies and the number of, maybe there are other ways of meeting, but the face-to-faces are the best way to do it. We offer, this is a program from Eurordis, and we offer this to groups around Europe, that we work on patient education. We have an online education tool that helps set up what patients need to know to begin to negotiate or to collaborate with companies. We also work on inviting companies, how to invite companies, making sure that we all agree on the same agenda, we move forward together, we take notes from the meeting, we follow up with a letter to the company, and then next steps. After we sit around a table for 4 or 8 hours, what's the next step? That's not the end of the show. Then we need to follow up. We need to actually move forward with how to implement some of the suggestions that we bring to the table. So it's really important. And we have standard operating procedures, et cetera, et cetera. The costs are simply divided by the number of companies who come to a meeting. So if it's a 4-day meeting with 4 companies, there's a cost of whatever it is. It depends on how many people, et cetera. But it's all divided by the number of companies, and that's the end of it. I won't go into it deeply today, but there's a charter for clinical trials that Eurordis has on its website, which is a document that basically says we as a company promise to engage with patients whenever possible. It's as simple as that. It's not a complicated document. Because it's Eurordis, it's 6 pages long, but really, it just says we will work with patients whenever we can. It's as simple as that. And then after that, the company and the CAB will form a memorandum of understanding that says what specific areas will we work on together. Will it be the design of the trial? Will it be the follow-up of the trial? Will it be the analysis of the trial? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it will be laid out in a memorandum of understanding between the company and the community. This will be a public document. It will be available online. So nothing confidential will be specifically mentioned in here, but each part will have confidential things that you'll be discussing internally between you, but it won't be in the public document. Again, the agenda is public. The agenda is just overall the products we'll be talking about and the main questions that will be delved into. That will also be public. We've been doing this for about a year with rare diseases, a little more than a year, and Eurordis we still don't have our website up. So actually, this stuff will happen, and it hasn't happened yet, but it will happen eventually. That all these documents will be public, because it's important to be as transparent as possible. We think to make sure that there's no sense of collusion or bad judgments or decisions being made in some smoky room with the most important people. And the horizon scanning, Jonathan told me you already have a horizon scanning done about how many companies there are, in what phases each product is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I won't show an example of that, but that's an important part of the process, is that the patients need to know what's coming and when, so we can know who to invite and when, to make these CAB meetings as useful as possible. Oh, I do have an example. So this is a 2-day example. Actually, both cystic fibrosis and Duchenne have been 4-day meetings because they've had more companies and needed more training and so forth. But the idea would be to have sort of, if you want three sponsors of 4 hours, then you have this version where you have 3 sponsors. But you can also do other things where you have a pre-meeting training. For Duchenne, before the meeting in June, we had a clinician come in from Paris to talk about how she involves patients in her practice in Paris. And then we had a basic scientist, Annemiek van Dam, from Amsterdam, who came in and talked to us about things like mouse models and things, which was also extremely interesting, at least for me, who as a mentor, I don't know all the specifics of the disease, so it was fascinating to me. And I think and we did a Survey Monkey afterwards, and everyone appreciated it very, very much, the pre-meeting training. And so that's sort of a typical layout. And usually also we have 4 hours or a few hours post-meeting of wrap-up of next steps, et cetera. We use professional note takers, which is extremely helpful, because that way we don't miss anything, we don't forget anything, and things are as clear as possible. We then spend about 2 weeks checking and double checking and editing the notes and so forth, and making the letters to each company, and then we send them to the companies. And so this is an idea of besides the horizon scanning, of how to decide which sponsors should be invited to a meeting. Obviously, sponsors in the rare disease field are the sponsors we're most interested in. But sponsors who have requested or are planning to request scientific advice or protocol assistance is really important. I think lots of times companies sort of forget that this is an easy and inexpensive way of getting clear information from the EMA before designing protocols. And so it's important that companies try to do this. And the same thing for early dialogue as well as parallel scientific advice. Again, we think that as much as possible working with regulators before and HTA bodies before setting in stone your protocol will only help the possibility of the protocol having positive results. If you can apply to PRIME, it would be really helpful. PRIME is a new way. Priority medicines is a new way for EMA to help commercial sponsors go through the process at EMA. That you have a history or an interest in submitting topics to UNITA, and that you don't have a history of bad practice. I won't give any examples of bad practice, but there are many out there. And I mean, obviously, this is slightly subjective, but you know it when you see it. Again, I'll just mention this word. I think it's really important for CABs to make sure that as much as on the table as possible that is not confidential. Again, we do sign confidentiality agreements, and we hold ourselves to maintaining those confidentiality agreements. The idea is not to get commercial secrets from companies and then go to the press. The idea is to work with companies and maintain that management of disclosure, of non-disclosure. And again, I've said it already, but there are many different places where we can give very specific input. Informed consent documents. At first, I thought it would be difficult for our companies to give us, to want specific feedback on their specific informed consent documents. But in fact, after the June meeting with Duchenne, 2 companies sent us 5 informed consent documents each. So that's 10 informed consent documents now we have to read and give input on. So sometimes when you say you want to do things, you really have to make sure you know you can do it, because now we have 10 informed consent documents that we have to give feedback into, which on one hand is wonderful, but on another hand means it's a lot of work for the people who are actually in the meeting. And we have to consider that and take that on board when we're moving forward. And again, this is just something to help the community members decide whether or not a trial makes sense or not. Is this trial a trial I would actually put together if I were making a trial? I think it's a really simple way of looking at, does this trial make sense, rather than listening to a company saying, oh, but EMA is forcing us to do this. Say, no, what do I need in a trial? And then we'll figure out how exactly we can make it work from both sides. Are there interactions? There are many drugs that people take that are outside the specific field of the disease, but they take, and they're really common in each disease area. We need to know that. We need to know drug interactions as early as possible. Is this a trial that I would enter, I would put my kid into? It's a really simple question and a simple way of asking. Sometimes when you ask that directly to a company, all of a sudden it's like, whew. You know, all of a sudden it's not the same thing anymore. You know, if you think, oh, really, maybe I wouldn't. So it's a useful thing. Would you go into that trial? Again, all the specific parts of a clinical trial that can be important for a patient that we can have input into. And again, things that many groups already do, like awareness and patient advocacy. So I don't know how we're doing for time. I don't think I need to go through this sort of individually specifically, but the idea is that we would find certain, we have a job description of what a community advisory board member needs to do. And obviously a terrible but important thing is that you need to be able to converse and maintain and defend yourself in English. So that's, it sometimes is a problem. In my country, for example, in Spain, it's not the easiest thing always to find someone to be part of a community advisory board. Of course, confidentiality is very important. Disclosure agreement is important. Insider trading, we also have a document to say that if we find out information that seems really sexy, we're not going to go out and buy stock in that company. You know, we need to make sure that doesn't happen. We're legal people. And again, so what we do is we offer ourselves as a mentor. The idea is that we would work with the group for a maximum of 2 years, where we help set up all the governance issues and so forth. But also I found that, at least me, when I mentor a group, being a third party also is really good for the meeting. I have an idea about the disease, but more importantly, I think I know the dynamic between companies and patients, and I can manage that really well. And I think that everyone else in the meeting doesn't have to worry about, oh, am I taking the meeting notes? Am I calling on the right person? And not being part of the meeting. And so that takes that responsibility away from the group of patients, and I'm able to do that very much more freely and sort of separately from the group. And so what we do is we offer to the companies follow-up meetings by teleconference within 6 weeks after the event, to see if there's any specific things that we can start working on now. For example, if they will send us the informed consents, et cetera. Sometimes they don't wait 6 weeks. Sometimes they just send them to us. I mean, which is really great. I think that really gives a sense of their desire to work with community. And again, we have online at Eurordis, we have the summer school, but we also have an online school now, and we have a winter school. And the summer school is more on regulatory issues than UPATI, which is on clinical development. Summer school is on regulatory issues, which is also really important. The online school also has a little bit of HTA, and we'll have more HTA as it moves forward. So there's lots of online stuff that we direct people to go look at. For example, with Duchenne, we spent 1 month before the June meeting working on the ethics module. And one person in the cab said, "What does ethics have to do with clinical trials?" I thought, okay, all right, yeah. No, so but then, you know, he read the training program and much better understood, and then we talked about it when we were we had a teleconference the Monday before the Wednesday face-to-face cab, and we talked more about what did we learn in the ethics module and so forth, and so now they're working on the regulatory module. We were going to go to the clinical trials module, but so many regulatory questions came up during the June meeting that I thought, well, we should go to regulatory now, and we'll do clinical trials after the summer. So I think it's really exciting that we can also sort of work on the agenda of the training according to the real needs as they happen of patients. So we're doing regulatory now. And again, this is just another way of showing what I said before, is that between Eurordis and the sponsor, there's this document called the charter, which is we will work with patients. Between Eurordis and the CAB, there's the standard operating procedures and how to move forward and actually doing the CAB itself. And Eurordis gives a seal, which is sort of a seal of promise of best practice. And then between the sponsors and CAB, there's the Memorandum of Understanding that they sign. The Memorandum of Understanding obviously is not legal and it's not binding. It's just a letter of good faith saying this is how we hope to work together. Again, I know that for companies, the legal department is really the largest hurdle. I think medical almost always immediately wants to come and wants input, but it's always the legal department who said, no, you can't do that. No, it's impossible. So, you know, we spend lots of hours on the phone with legal departments from around the world. It's all right. We're not going to give anything away. And so it's just a question of them becoming more comfortable with us. And I think that over time, that will happen. We did Survey Monkeys for the CAB members after the last Duchenne meeting, but we also did it for the companies who came, and we asked them similar questions, and actually all their answers were extremely positive, and so we're hoping to use some of those answers that they gave to calm down other companies about the difficulties or the danger of working with patients on clinical trial issues. So I don't need to go in this, but I think that basically CAB members should be people with the disease, or if it's a similar disease, they should be either guardians, carers, or patient advocates of some sort. Members of a CAB will be considered to have a level 3 conflict of interest with the EMA. Oh, okay, this is my last one, okay. So level 3 means you can only be invited to the EMA and give testimony, but you can't be on scientific advice committees, you can't be on you can't be on any standing committees within EMA. So that's important for CAB members to know, that if it's a body of 12 people, and I'm using you three tables as the idea, then whoever represents Lymphoma Coalition at EMA has to be from someone else who doesn't have a connection to the CAB. And I think that's really, we're working on lowering the level, at least to level 2, to use patient investigator, but right now we're still at level 3, so we can't be anything more than testifiers at the EMA. And of course, I think it's really important, like Giliosa said earlier, is that we really do need to want to work pretty intensely in science. This isn't a weekend job, let's say. Even though I suggest you need to dedicate 4 or 5 hours a day, that's once you know pretty much everything you need to know. But until you get there, you need to go to congresses, you need to read as much as you can, you need to talk with other people about the science in general terms. And I think that's really important. And when I started this, I was an architect. And here I am 29 years later as a CAB supervisor. So I think it's because I love science. And so I think hopefully you can find 10 or 12 people also who love science and are willing to commit to this. And there are more slides, but I think I'm going to hand back to Stefan, and we can continue the talk.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.